You are watching True Crimes AI on the night of November 17, 1978. Four young employees vanished from a fast food restaurant in Speedway, Indiana. At first, police believed it was a simple robbery. 2 days later, it became one of the most haunting unsolved murder cases in the Midwest. This is the story of the Burger Chef murders in 1978. Speedway, Indiana, a suburb of Indianapolis, was seen as a safe, all-American community. It's a place where families lived, kids went to school, and life felt predictable. The local Burger Chef restaurant, right off the busy Interstate 465, was a familiar landmark. It was a popular spot, often staffed by teenagers working part-time jobs after school or on weekends. It was just a normal fast food joint in a normal town. But on one cold November night, that normality was shattered forever. That night, four employees were on the closing shift. Jane Fried, at 20, was the assistant manager, the oldest and most responsible of the group. With her were three high school students: 16-year-old Daniel Davis, 17-year-old Ruth Shelton, and 16-year-old Mark Flemons. For them, it was just another Friday night at work. They were probably talking about their weekend plans, finishing up their cleaning duties, and looking forward to heading home, but none of them ever made it. The night of the disappearance began like any other. The restaurant closed at 11 o'clock p.m., and the four employees started their routine to lock up. They counted the money, cleaned the kitchen, and prepared for the next day. Around 11:30 p.m., another employee arrived to pick up his paycheck. He noticed something was wrong immediately. The back door was unlocked and ajar. Inside, the restaurant was completely empty. The lights were still on, the registers were open, and purses and jackets were left behind as if their owners had just stepped out for a moment. But Jane, Daniel, Ruth, and Mark were nowhere to be found. About $581 was missing from the cash drawers, which is roughly $2,700. In today's money, on the floor, officers found two empty bank deposit bags. It looked like a robbery, plain and simple. The police were called, and they treated the scene exactly like that, a straightforward theft. They assumed the young employees had either taken the money and run off, or perhaps were just joyriding and would turn up soon. This assumption would become a critical mistake, because the police believed it was just a robbery. They didn't secure the restaurant as a major crime scene. The manager was called in, and unbelievably, the restaurant was cleaned up and reopened for business the very next day. Any potential fingerprints, footprints, or other forensic evidence that might have been left behind by the perpetrators was likely wiped away. As the hours stretched into a full day and then another, the families of the four missing employees grew frantic. This wasn't a teenage prank. Something was terribly wrong. What started as a suspected petty theft had escalated into a terrifying mystery involving four missing young people. The agonizing wait for answers came to a brutal end on Sunday, November 19th, 2 days after they vanished. A couple walking in a remote, wooded area in Johnson County, about 20 miles south of Speedway, made a horrifying discovery. There, scattered among the trees, were the bodies of Jane Fried, Daniel Davis, Ruth Shelton, and Mark Flemons. The search was over, but the nightmare had just begun. Investigators determined that the cause of death for all four victims was shockingly violent. Daniel and Ruth had been shot multiple times with a .38 caliber firearm. Mark had been bludgeoned and had died from asphyxiation. Jane Fried had been stabbed twice in the chest with a knife, the blade breaking off in her body. Some of the victims also showed signs of a physical struggle before they died. The crime had escalated from a simple robbery to a quadruple homicide. This wasn't just about money. It was brutal and personal. The crime scene in the woods offered few clues. Investigators found tire tracks nearby, suggesting the victims had been driven to this remote location. But in the late 1970s, forensic science was not what it is today. The tire impressions couldn't be definitively matched to a specific vehicle. No murder weapon was ever recovered from the scene. The knife blade found in Jane's body was a common type, making it difficult to trace. With the restaurant crime scene compromised from the start and limited physical evidence from the woods, the investigation was facing an uphill battle. Authorities quickly concluded that this was not the work of a single person controlling four people, two of them teenage boys, would have been nearly impossible for one individual. They believed at least two perpetrators were involved. The investigation expanded, and over the years, police received more than 5,000 tips. They questioned hundreds of people and investigated numerous suspects. Several individuals with histories of violent crime and robbery were looked at closely, but one by one, they were cleared. A few names surfaced as strong persons of interest. In the 1980s, a man named Donald Forrester, who was later imprisoned for another crime, claimed he was involved. He even led police to the scene and provided details that weren't public knowledge. However, he later recanted his confession, and investigators couldn't find enough evidence to charge him. Another theory pointed to a local gang known for robbing businesses, but again, no solid link could be established. One man even claimed to have witnessed the abduction from a nearby parking lot, but his story was inconsistent and ultimately deemed unreliable. The case was a labyrinth of leads that went nowhere, confessions that were taken back, and theories that could never be proven. So what really happened that night? The most common theory remains a robbery gone wrong. The perpetrators may have intended only to steal the money but were surprised by the four employees. In a moment of panic, they decided to abduct them to prevent them from identifying them. The murders, then, were a cold-blooded act to eliminate all witnesses. But this theory has a major hole. Why abduct for people? It would have been far easier and less risky to simply tie them up or flee immediately. Transporting for victims 20 miles away to a remote location introduces a huge amount of risk and complexity. Another theory suggests the involvement of an organized group. Perhaps this wasn't a random act, but a planned hit by criminals who knew the restaurant's closing procedures. This could explain the coordinated abduction of four people. Some investigators also considered a personal motive. The brutal nature of the killings, especially the stabbing of Jane Fried, suggested a level of rage that goes beyond a simple robbery. Was one of the employees the target? Or did one of them know the attackers? These are questions that have haunted investigators for decades. In 2018, 40 years after the murders, the Indiana State Police announced they were taking a fresh look at the case, with major advances in forensic technology, especially DNA analysis. There was a glimmer of hope. They re-examined old evidence, hoping to find a microscopic trace, a hair, a fiber, a drop of blood that could finally be tested. However, the passage of time is the enemy of cold cases. Evidence degrades, the original crime scene was contaminated, and much of the physical material from the 1970s was not preserved in a way that is ideal for modern testing. Despite the renewed effort and public attention, no arrests have been made. So why, after all these years, does the Burger Chef case still captivate and horrify us? It's because it represents a profound loss of innocence. For young people at the very beginning of their lives were stolen from their families and their community while doing something as ordinary as working a shift at a fast food restaurant. It's a story that hits close to home for so many of us. The initial mistakes in the investigation also add a layer of tragedy, leaving everyone to wonder what might have been if the scene had been treated differently from the start. For the families of Jane, Daniel, Ruth, and Mark, the pain is unimaginable. They have waited more than 4 decades for justice, for answers, for someone to be held accountable. Today, the Burger Chef murders case remains an open and active homicide investigation. The Indiana State Police continue to review evidence and are still open to new tips from the public. But more than 45 years later, no one has ever been charged. The mystery of who committed this horrific crime and why remains unsolved. A late shift, a nearly empty restaurant for young employees who never made it home. The Burger Chef murders stand as a chilling reminder of how quickly an ordinary moment can turn into a lifelong tragedy, leaving behind a legacy of unanswered questions and enduring grief. Thank you for watching this episode of True Crimes AI. If you found this case as compelling as we did, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into real cases. We'll see you next time.